items 4 and 6 recorded by Hansard. Any apologies? No apologies. Draft minutes, pages 5 to 8. Members content their accurate record. Read.
Yep.
Table request, pages 10 to 11 for noting. Moving on to the DFP response to the Committee's report and inquiry into flexible working in the public sector. I can refer members to their papers from pages 13 through to 24 of your packs. So, can I welcome the witnesses to the table? Did you jump?
The accused.
Paul and Mark, you're both very welcome. Do you want to go and give us a quick presentation, or you want to go straight to questions?
I think just to say at the start, the flexible working report, is a report that we've welcomed strongly. We've made responses before, we've been scrutinised before on it, and we've welcomed you to Clare House to see some of the facilities that we have. And the Minister has also corresponded recently on the subject as well. So we're welcome just to take any questions you have on it.
Just in terms of the Minister's response, it would usually be the case that in terms of reports and the recommendations that the committee put forward, that there would be almost an itemised response by the department to each of the recommendations. Is that something that will be forthcoming from the department?
It's something that we haven't specifically planned. So if you'd like us to come back with a specific response on each of them, that is something that we could take away and consider.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go through the recommendations that the committee put forward and give us a brief view? To inform members before we open up the questions.
Give me a moment just please to find them. We'll start with the number one, the one-size-fits-all policy approach, and we welcome your conclusion that that isn't appropriate. Certainly when we've been in front of the committee before, the message that we've tried to give quite strongly is that we believe we've got a number of policies that support and enable flexible working, and that different parts of NICS and different parts of the wider public sector have different needs and approaches to flexible working. So we're glad that you agree that a one-size-fits-all policy approach is not appropriate. In fact, if you look at there's one report that you refer to, and I've made some quite strong references to the Cabinet Office report on the way we work, which is a guide to smart working in government, which I think is an excellent overview of the overall capability of what flexible working can and has achieved, certainly over in Whitehall departments. And if we look at that in conjunction with your statement that one size doesn't fit all, we would support that. I mean, they make quite a strong assertion in that document that it's up to individual departments to have their own policies in place as to what their needs are with regards to flexible working. So on that one specifically, we would still be quite strong with the view that we've got the necessary policies backed up by the technology and the plans that we're going to continue to roll out in terms of property management.
There's effectively really two menus there, isn't there? Because there's a menu of the HR policies. There's a number of HR policies, and I can go into those depending on what members' questions are in terms of the detail of those. But as Paul rightly says, those are backed up very importantly by the technology, the ability to deliver things practically, and that helps to make remote working much more of a realistic prospect now than it ever was before, and increasingly so. Technology is the key enabler to help that to happen, but the two work together. So the two menus of policies and options there that I think sort of fulfills this no one size fits all, so business areas choose from those depending on their need.
I'll pause after each of these just to see what questions you might have.
Yeah, I mean, one's pretty straightforward, and I think there's consensus on that one, so
okay.
The later points might be different.
Okay. Number two, your view that focus should not be on home working in particular, but rather on selecting the appropriate remote working options and technologies. Again, very much concur with that. That's the approach that we have been and continue to adopt. The issue of home working, let perhaps come back to that one, but in terms of appropriate remote working options and technologies, we continue to try different things out. I mean, you met the Enterprise Design Authority team, some of you, when you went to Clare House. Must be 18 months ago now, perhaps, and it's certainly some time ago. And you saw some of the technology options that we had there in Future at Work. So opportunities like unified communications, where we're able to now roll out video, voice, screen sharing, audio conferencing, all of those things. We're providing that capability. WebEx, both internally and externally, in terms of web conferencing, video conferencing, and we're continuing to see an increased uptake on things like that. So we're continuing to provide and test technologies as they come along and as they prove themselves, making them more widely available. So, for example, if you remember the Jabber product, which is the one that we've chosen, it's an interesting name. But I mean, I've instructed that Jabber is to be rolled out across enterprise shared services, so that we can, in fact, be an exemplar. We know other parts of the service have actually adopted it anyway. So we're continuing to push the boundaries in terms of the technological capabilities, and that does then provide the facility for remote working. The latest one we're looking at, and I know as Assembly members, and you've got different technology platforms supported from a different place, but you've got the kind of board minute capability. It's good to see many of you using those technologies around the table this morning, where you can have your papers put into appropriate folders. You can see what you need, you can drill into them, you can work your way from there. Again, we're testing those kinds of technologies at the moment. Wi-Fi, we've enabled Clarence Court, in terms of, I feel like, a big pathfinder building to see what's possible there, because having come from, let's call it, a fairly restrictive, secure environment where our approach was, I feel like, quite conservative and risk averse, we're now looking at, well, the world is moving on, the review of classified markings has moved on, so what do we need to provide in terms of Wi-Fi and capability on that? And we're testing a number of things in that area. So we continue to provide and test the technologies. In terms of hub and satellite offices, and I know you've communicated with us, and we've had quite a bit of correspondence on that. I mean, that is an area that we're continuing to focus on as well. There's a number of hubs and areas where we're providing touchdown facilities, where we're providing business zones, and the plan certainly is to make more of those available, not in every town or village in Northern Ireland, but to move towards, if you like, having places where people would have to travel less distance to get towards. So again, it's trying to provide the capabilities that departments and organisations will need to serve their business needs.
And particularly, just to comment maybe on the home working, the technology that Paul has sort of described there literally enables any civil servant with the appropriate approvals of their line manager's agreement. You can be working from home, you can be working on your laptop, your phone number will follow you because of the technology, and there's the ability to either plug in through your broadband and log in securely and onto your own network, or if that's not available, then obviously there's 3G capability as well. So people can be working from home, or working from Marlborough House, or working from Castle Buildings, or wherever it might be, and the person who's in contact with them has no idea where they are. It's all about getting the job done rather than where they're sit.
In terms of homework, how much potential, in your view, have we still to realise in terms of increasing homework within the public sector?
That very much is driven by the business needs of the various departments. I think there is potential. I think you're right. I've no doubt that there will be. But our role is very much, we believe, to provide the technology and provide the ability to do it. And we do promote and encourage that as well. It's not a matter of being static. I mean, Paul has described about developing and growing the technology, and he has a small team that work within his group that are encouraging and helping departments to deploy that technology. Likewise, from a policy point of view, we would be promoting that. So we're encouraging staff, letting them know what's available. We have Express HR, which is a quarterly HR publication within the civil service, which sort of lets people know what the available policies are, and we would occasionally promote various flexible working arrangements within that. For example, term time working was in a recent edition. So there is the scope there, and we're encouraging and promoting that. But ultimately, it's for each individual business area to determine what they need, how they can best leverage it, and how they can make best use of that ability to deliver their business needs.
And how much cultural resistance is there to homeworking?
I'm sure that I think that will vary depending on where you are, but I also think it's changing. I think there's a real. I mean, I'm relatively new to the civil service, and I've been here about 7 or 8 years. But I can even see a change in that short space of time, and I think a lot of it has to do with the environment of the office, the workplace NI standards, open plan environment, much more accessibility, and I think that culture is changing, and the willingness to adopt technology. Sometimes we're all driven by our children. You know, the children are the ones that are picking up the technology and doing everything, and we sometimes lag behind. But I think there is a change. It just takes time, and I think that's the nature of human nature. Maybe that not that keen to change. But I've seen a lot of changes even in the short time that I've been in the civil service.
And just before I bring Adrian in terms of those who avail of home working, is there a tendency for it to be more senior positions, senior management, to have that flexibility as opposed to those on down the food chain, for want of a better term?
I don't have the data to either support or deny that, but I do know of individuals at all grades that would work from home on occasion. So I believe it's more driven by the job. So, for example, there are certain jobs where it clearly lends itself to, regardless of what grade. One very obvious example that I know we've quoted before was the schools inspectors, because they're virtually never in the office; they're always out there. But I know even within DFP, our business consultancy service, the nature of their work is always out with clients, or primarily out with clients. So that is not dependent on grade; it's dependent on the job role. There's probably some truth in that. I guess the more senior you become, you end up having more control of your own work, and there's probably an element of that. But I think the most important point is that it's available to all, depending on the business needs, regardless of the grade.
Adrian?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You sort of covered the question I was wanting to ask was about resistance, because I thought there might be some, maybe line managers' resistance and allowing staff to work from home or do flexible working. But also you mentioned there about promoting, and to promote what's going on. And how often do you do that? You mentioned term time, but term time's been on the go for a very while now.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that the last time you actually promoted, or what?
No. I mean, there are a number of things. Express HR is a quarterly publication, so we go out once a quarter from corporate HR to all of the civil service that summarises policy changes, anything new that's changed from a legislation point of view, but also occasionally picks up on other things. So, for example, Cycle to Work is one that we pick up every so often just to promote it and encourage people and let them know that it's available. That's focusing on the individual employee or staff member. But separate to that, from a business point of view, we would have an HR Directors Forum which meets regularly. And again, there would be discussions there from a business point of view about what is available, how departments can make best use of it. But it's not done in a prescriptive manner. And the report has already drawn attention to the fact that we don't have an overarching strategy that attempts to force that out on departments. But that's deliberately done that way. What we do is try and offer it up, make it visible, make it transparent, but ultimately the department that needs it and can make best use of it has to draw it down.
Well, what if a department was resistant and you think it could work better with it? Would you not try and enforce it then? Saying you've seen a department that thought you could work well this year, but really the senior manager was interested in his old-fashioned or whatever, and wasn't taking it, then would you not try and plan some way?
I believe our role is very much to provide the facilities and to encourage and to explain the benefits. But ultimately, a department is its own employer, and the department makes its own business decisions, and we can't overrule those. But we do try and encourage or cajole, but ultimately can't decide on their behalf.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Adrian. Within the report, we had a table that contained feedback from all the departments and some arm's length bodies. And in terms of flexible location working, no figures available, no figures available, no figures available. Ad hoc arrangements, ad hoc arrangements, ad hoc arrangements. So, like you say, so the department has sort of taken a almost hands-off approach. But then, is there really any, incentive for departments to push this, or how do we ensure departments are actually making this a priority? And certainly I know that some within the committee would feel that this needs to be better monitored to ensure that pressure is put on departments to put these arrangements in place, because Adrian's right, there will be people within management positions who are not going to push this, and there will be employees who would like to avail of it, those that have to travel long distances and are being less productive because of all that travel time, which is unnecessary. So is that something that you would consider?
If I pick up the first bit of that, perhaps maybe come back to the monitoring piece. And this is where there's very, very strong link into the reform of property management project that many of you would be quite well aware of. If we look at the benchmarked office estate as it was in 2012, we were sitting with 6 desks for every 5 people, an average of about 17 to 18 square metres. Now, as we're continuing to roll out what we're calling the Workplace NI standard, we're moving to the 9 to 11 square metres per desk and moving towards 4 desks for 5 people. So if 5 people come into work in the morning, there's only going to be 4 desks. Now that's the ultimate sort of position to be in. Providing that capability, I think, will actually incentivise the behaviour of departments to consider, okay, how can we exploit that? That's there to improve service for the employee, for the department itself, but also to reduce cost and increase the efficiency of the way we use the estate. So a very big part of what we're doing is to create, again, I keep using this term, creating the capability that will then incentivise departments and employers to avail of those things and take them forward. Monitoring. This is one of these ones, you know, DFP monitors many things, as you well know, and can often be accused of being perhaps slightly bureaucratic in terms of some of those things, and we're always looking of ways of trying to reduce that. The danger, and it's a point worth debating perhaps, the danger of putting a monitoring procedure in here is that we would then commission each department to tell us exactly what they're doing. That would be rolled out through the department, rolled up, brought back. We'd look at it, examine it, collate it, centralise it, and, you know, so there'd be a lot more resource required, and in a climate where we're actually looking to reduce the resource, there's perhaps a tension on that one, but I think we understand where the committee's coming from on that one.
Yeah, but it wouldn't require that big a resource to, given the benefits of the flexible working proposals. You know, so it'd be worth it.
It's perhaps a moot point as to, you know, if we had more evidence, would it change the behaviour in terms of what we're doing? Again, it's back to, I don't think it would. It may assist departments in terms of their behavioural changes. It might help them in terms of understanding, you know, where they've got pockets of cultural resistance, to come back to that phrase as well. But you know, we believe very strongly we are following best practice in terms of the capability that we're providing, and I feel like switching on that capability for departments to take up. Monitoring,
yeah.
Don't know.
Yeah, but just sorry for interrupting, Mark. I mean, in terms of us in this committee doing our job in terms of holding you to account,
yes,
or doing the work on this area, you know, if you're coming back year after year saying it's out there, we don't have figures, but everything's hunky-dory, you know, we can't do our job to hold you to account. You know, every civil servant could come before us and say, well, we don't have the figures, but things are moving in the right direction. You know, that's not how this works. We need figures, we need targets, and we need positive outcomes.
The only comment I was going to add was really, if there was to be any form of monitoring, it would also need to distinguish. We've talked here about cultural change, but also business need. Raw data won't give you that. You know, Department A having 5% doing flexible working and Department B having 20% doing flexible working doesn't actually tell you anything, because Department A may well, in the nature of their work, might be all customer facing, and they cannot make avail of the facilities. So it would need to be more sophisticated than that, and I think it would become quite complex. It's not just about raw data. It's somehow, I think, somehow convincing departments, the hearts and minds, of the need to make the maximum use of it possible, and how we can best achieve that, and encourage them to use it. The raw data might be helpful to some extent on that, but I think it would be very limited, because it doesn't identify the business need.
But even if there was a minimum standard of what departments should be, you know, bringing back to yourselves, I mean, in terms of DFP, you've given us figures in terms of laptop users, BlackBerry users, etc. You know, that kind of thing should be easy enough to bring together in the respective departments. So I think the department should consider minimum standards in terms of departments giving you an update on flexible working, and in my view, especially in terms of home working as well.
I mean, those specific ones you've mentioned, I mean, those are, we have that information in terms of, you know, BlackBerries, laptops. In fact, I thought we'd actually provided that to the committee.
But what I'm saying is those kind of things, ensure there's a minimum standard so that departments in some way are being held to account for the flexible working proposals, you know.
I mean, perhaps reform of property management as a programme and the SRO for it. So perhaps that is something we can consider as to feel like how we can look at the benefits and outcomes. I mean, at the moment, the key focus is to drive down the cost and increase the efficiency of the estate by providing the kind of flexible working capabilities that we've talked about. So perhaps we can consider, if you like, is there anything else that we need to be monitoring or measuring as part of that? Because we're almost 1 year into a 3-year programme on that. Year 1 was very much about getting the plan set up, resourced, getting all the different line items agreed in terms of the wider government office estate. But I think if there's additional information that we think we would need to help us measure the benefit and the success of that, and that would align with the committee's expectations, perhaps that is worth considering a little bit.
On the plus side then, there's obviously going to be a rollout of flexible location facilities in Omagh, Coleraine, Cookstown, Ballykelly, Newry and Derry, and that's obviously a positive step in the right direction, and I presume it's a direct response to the committee's report. How will those facilities work in practice? How many staff will they accommodate, and what I'm just trying to get a sense of what impact it will have in terms of the public sector.
I think in terms of those details, we haven't got a detailed answer for you on, and I think they're going to be greatly impacted by departmental restructuring in a year's time as well, as to exactly what the new departments are going to require. But again, it's back to if it's the old Field of Dreams scenario, if you remember that movie. If we build it, will they come? We're trying to build a facility on the basis that, again, the departments will avail of that. And again, that is something that we do monitor the usage of those kind of facilities, the touchdown zones, the business zones. We're able to provide statistics on that. But in terms of anything beyond that, it's going to be a case of, well, what will departments need over the next 12 months and then moving forwards?
How many of these are existing facilities? I mean, obviously Ballykelly is going to be a new build, but is Coleraine, is that existing office space at the County Hall?
Coleraine and Omagh planned, I think, later this year. Cookstown in 2016. It's a new DARD office. Ballykelly 2017. It's obviously part of the new DARD HQ. I mean, we've got Academy House. It was available from July 2014. We have a small part of Lanyon Plaza, the LPS building. It's got a bit of a touchdown facility. Castle Buildings, Marlborough House have been available for some time. Clare House is back online again. I mean, if you recall that we've been through some quite major changes in terms of increasing the density of population in Clare House, and we've actually managed to free up some of the originally planned in workspace, so we can use that for touchdown as well. So it's ongoing. That's the current plan. IT Assist uses various satellite zones as well for pockets of 1 or 2 people, so that they've got engineers close to where they're going to be required. But those are the main ones. Londonderry and Newry, I think again are planned during 15-16, subject to available budget. And property management and property maintenance, unfortunately, is one of those budgets that we're looking at quite severely at the moment.
So these will be open to staff from different departments? I'm just trying to get a sense of how they...
That's the idea. We had I didn't call it a smart card, it was just a little laminated card that we made available as a sort of future work card, almost as an identifier. You applied for it and you got it. So the idea is to make it available for anybody who wants or needs to use it. And then how we monitor the access to various buildings, then that's all that is used for.
The other thing in terms of policies as well, I mean, that's all about trying to make it available and open and transparent to people. Likewise in policies, we're planning to pull, I mean, I don't know if any of you have had the joy of looking at the HR handbook in terms of, sometimes it's hard to navigate your way around the NICS HR handbook. So over time we are trying to pull things together, and we're pulling together all the flexible working, alternative working policies. At the minute they're all over the place. They're in various different places because they've evolved over time. We're pulling those all into a single alternative working handbook chapter, so at least it's much more transparent and available to people. So it's just it's trying to encourage the knowledge about it, both to departments as an employer, but also obviously to the staff as individuals.
Just another point as well that strikes me. I mean, I would say these will be for a large number of public servants, but is there any barriers to doing it on a smaller scale? Because I'm thinking the old councils are all closing up this month, and I presume there may be opportunities there use office space in places like Ballycastle or Ballymoney or Bangor. Is there? Would it be worthwhile looking at that area?
We've had a great degree of communication with the councils in terms of their requirements, especially if you look at areas like planning, where planning is being devolved out to the councils and what their premises requirements are going to be. There's certainly been a high degree of interaction on that one to understand what it's going to be. Again, it's back to what will they need. So, a planner in a particular area in one council area might be able to do their job just as effectively from their headquarters function as somewhere 5 or 10 miles down the road. We haven't been approached in terms of flexible working. It's back to NICS as 12% of the public sector. So we're very much focused on NICS and its capabilities. If there is a potential to share that kind of space, the old one-stop shop, if you recall, a number of years ago, was very much the in vogue term being used. I still think that's an area where we'd like to try out, especially if you look at places like Omagh. I think Omag's got 16 different public sector office buildings in it, and there must be better opportunity to provide a more consolidated facility than that kind of approach. So those are the kind of things perhaps we could be looking at further.
Okay, point number 3 then.
Point number 3, we agree the potential benefits are well documented, well evidenced. We believe we're seeing the benefits of that in the Northern Ireland Civil Service as well. You've said about looking at an invest to save measure. I don't know whether that's going to be specifically required or not. We'll come on to the ESS business plan later, but as an example of, I think, a more holistic approach where we're using all of the different policies that are available to us, both in terms of like flexible practice, flexible location, all of those things. And take something like a sickness absence measure. I mean, we've seen our sickness absence, and I'm using ESS just as an example here, but we've seen sickness absence coming down quite significantly on that. But that's also then linked back into performance management, which we'll talk about later, and that becomes the other side of how do you manage that side of the equation as well. But whether we need a specific invest to save, I'm not sure whether we do or not.
Okay, next point.
Number 4, we're glad to agree with you that you see NICS as an exemplar organisation. we thought so as well, so we're glad the committee agreed with us on that one. And again, if you compare it back with that Cabinet Office report on the way we work, the Smart Working Guide, I don't think there's anything in that we don't do or don't have available as a facility.
Okay.
Number 5.
Yep.
In terms of flexible location, this is back to managing by presence, moving away from that towards managing by results, and the issue of performance management. And I think this is an area where we still need to do some work on. I think performance management has sort of almost come full circle from when we introduced HR Connect, which again we'll touch on later in the session. We provided a facility for the monitoring and, if you like, the form-filling aspects of performance management. And I suspect that in some areas the focus was taken off the true aspect of performance management, which is looking at a person's needs, objectives aligned with the department's business plans, needs and objectives, and got slightly sidetracked towards how do you fill the form in. And we've done a lot of work, as have corporate HR, and Mark will talk about this, in terms of changing the focus back to the form is only the thing at the very end of the exercise. That is not the be-all and end-all. Performance management is about managing by results and making sure that objectives are being clearly articulated and understood. We've moved away from a 5-box marking system towards a 2-box marking system, so you're either satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Does that mean that we're doing performance management in the way we need to do it right across the service? Again, as an opportunity for debate, perhaps.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I mean, last year we took that first step, if you like, in terms of changing the rating or simplifying it. As of next week, the 1st of April, they're launching a simplified online system. So to Paul's point, there used to be quite a complex form to fill in. We're stripping all that out, boiling it back to actually to take away the hurdles for people, or the excuses, if that's the right word. So that will be launched next week, keeping it much simpler. But to Paul's point, the key thing is the conversation. The key thing in all of this is the discussion between the line manager and the individual. And there has been a lot of advice and guidance and really a pushing of the whole performance management culture to try and increase compliance and also the fact that people follow the process properly. And we've introduced a number of compliance measures that departments have been ensuring that they follow. And there's been a lot of emphasis right up to Permanent Secretary level about pushing and encouraging performance management, and specifically individuals having objectives that align with their departmental objectives and their own business area, but they have personal objectives that then they're held accountable to. So the system has been there for a long time. I think the system has just been a little bit too convoluted and complicated, and we've stripped a lot of that back. It kept the core of it, but actually tried to simplify it. And actually it's about compliance now, and it's about the culture of people actually making use of the system properly.
And providing the training and support that they require as well. And again, the HR business partner model, again, we've adopted very strongly and led with in ESS, where the onus and the responsibility is very much on the line manager to do performance management on a regular basis. It's not a once a year or twice a year thing, and I think some people still perhaps feel it is. And again, as a specific example, my direct reports, and we've tried to roll this out right through the organisation, there's 900 people in ESS. I meet with my senior team one-on-one once every month. Formally, we do a performance management review every 6 months and then at the end of the year, but that is purely compliance, because the performance management is an ongoing thing. It's part of the embedded culture that we have now. And if you again roll that back to sickness absence, we've been very clear in terms of directing and supporting all our managers across ESS and into the wider DFP as to how they should be taking up their responsibilities in those things. And I think that's been seen in the results that we're getting in reduced sickness absence in DFP. I think there's a very clear correlation there. I wouldn't want to rest my laurels on it.
And just to reiterate Paul's point on the training, actually a lot of work has been done with CAL. We've worked with them, and they've completely revised the performance management training last year. That was introduced to reflect the new approach. And they have developed and are about to launch an e-learning package on performance management. That will be coming out within the next few months, and that effectively will roll out to all NICS staff to remind them of their responsibilities and their obligations, but also to coach them and to develop and ensure that they are following the process appropriately, but actually having those helpful and constructive conversations with their line managers. So there's quite a lot of work that's going on in that area.
Okay, number 6.
Number 6 is a recommendation on perhaps considering a programme for government commitment. Well, again, the new programme for government hasn't been commissioned yet, and there's been a one-year extension to this year's one, so that there won't be a PFG commitment into 15-16. I don't think we're a big fan, and I don't think the Minister particularly wants to consider a strong PFG commitment. I think the idea is to try to encourage the programme for government to look more at external services as opposed to the internal enabling and capabilities on things. But I think that will come out in the wash as we move into the next term of commissioning programme for government.
Something's rolling out altogether then at this stage? Or?
Oh, not ruling anything out, I'm not giving you the idea of where we're coming from on it.
I think it needs careful consideration, I think was the phrase that was in the response to the committee. So.
Okay, number 7.
7 was there's an onus on all departments to ensure that work styles and tasks associated with each job are assessed at business area or team level to determine the applicable flexible working practices. Again, I think this is back to it's reinforcing that one size doesn't fit all, or that directing something from DFP perhaps is not the most appropriate way of doing things, but that we agree that yes, each individual job and role needs to be assessed in the context of a department's business needs. So again, that's an area that we would agree with.
How many jobs will be assessed, or what proportion of jobs should be assessed within departments are being assessed?
I mean, there's 2 processes for assessing jobs, and Mark, you keep me right on. There's the JESP and the JEGS process. So there's the JESP is
for senior civil service posts. JEGS is for below the senior civil service, yeah. And
that's the formal way of it, if you like, assessing and putting points against what level a job should be at. But that's very much based on specific objectives and business needs. They tend to be looked at as and when things change, as opposed to a regular review of jobs and roles. Again, I think departmental restructuring will probably have a significant spike in terms of what we need to look at there. So there's not a plan to go round the whole system and review all jobs and roles to do this. It's simply reflecting and recognising that, yes, it's a good thing to do as and when it is required, but
But in terms of the significant changes that are coming fast at us in terms of the public sector, is that also an opportunity to get something like this and to have jobs assessed for flexible working? If posts are going to be changing, if staff are going to be moving in more significant numbers than before, is there an opportunity?
That's inevitable that is going to be required, yes.
And there should be more opportunities, I hope. I know there's a business need there, but where there is a rationalisation or a reduction in the number of staff doing work, which is inevitable in the coming year in particular within the civil service, we need to think how to do things differently. And if there's a way of rejigging teams to different locations, then absolutely there should be the opportunities there. And I would like to think the tools that we're providing would be used to support any outworking of the voluntary exit scheme. You know, I mean, there's likely to be a lot of, I know David Sterling was here a couple of weeks ago and covered some of the areas of the voluntary exit scheme. There's likely to be a lot of outworking of redeployment and a lot of moving and changing of how we do things. So these tools, I think, will come into their own at that stage, and departments should be seriously considering how they can make the maximum use of them.
I mean, I'm certainly looking, I can only talk about ESS, but it's a big organisation, so it's an opportunity for us where perhaps there has been some perceived grade drift. To look at, okay, if we're going to have less resource and we'll lose resource through the voluntary exit scheme, is there a more appropriate way of considering how jobs are graded and loaded on that basis as well? And that obviously that will be done in consultation with TUS.
Okay, question 8 then, or point 8.
Point 8, the strategic implementation of flexible working facilitated by a corresponding rollout of appropriately designed workplaces. Well, I mean, this is part of the day job now. It's become embedded as part of what we deliver. The workplace NI standard that I referred to earlier. We've got much less choice in terms of the type or size of desk that's going to be available. It sits off a standard framework and catalogue. We've talked about the 9 to 11 square metres. We've talked about the technology enabling. All our buildings are connected via Network NI. And then our shared services capability supports the working practices that are going to be required. So, yeah, as we review and refurbish and acquire buildings, we've got a very, very clear standard, and it meets exactly, I believe, what the committee is recognising here.
I think sometimes we forget how far we've come because you know, in terms of, you go from day to day almost, but if I look back, as I say, I was in the civil service 7 or 8 years, but I've seen a big change in the last 7 or 8 years in terms of some cultural shift about being more open. And whenever we've moved to more open plan, I think that was a fundamental thing that really got people thinking and got a reaction, to be fair. A lot of people reacted negatively because they've always been used to having their own office. But actually over time, generally, I think the mood has changed and I get a much greater sense of support for the approach for the open plan and for the whole workplace NI standards. And it just does take time. But actually, I think we have come a long way. And if anybody who knew the civil service of 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you know, it's radically different in terms of not just the technology, but actually how we do business, how we address each other, and how we just actually manage the day-to-day works. Much more progressive and much more effective, I think.
And Clare House is a really good example of that. I mean, you know, when our own minister has gone open plan, the permanent secretary, his senior staff in Clare House, they're all open plan. There are no separate offices other than those that are used for meetings.
I was going to ask, since the committee went to Clare House, has there been any changes in terms of...
And that's probably the biggest change you would see.
Anybody in it now?
It's full to capacity.
Very few in it when we visited.
It's you must have got
open plan took on a new meaning, you remember?
We've exploited the opportunity that was there and we've crammed it to capacity, I think the term we would use.
Okay, point 9.
I think point 9 we perhaps covered earlier in terms of the satellite and hub working. You know, it is part of the plan as we're moving forwards, unless there's anything else you want to specifically cover on that one.
Okay.
Number 10, two aspects of this, that the public sector in Northern Ireland appears to lag behind other jurisdictions. I'll refer to the NICS, which is the only bit that I've got responsibility for. I think we're at the same level, or perhaps in some areas well ahead of other jurisdictions. I think that's supported by evidence. Other parts of the public sector I can't comment on because they're not my responsibility. So I think that's one where there's the danger with that as seem to be a sweeping statement, you know, that how can that influence be taken out to the other parts of the public sector? I can understand the committee's concern on that one, but I think as far as NICS is concerned, we're well ahead in certain areas, certainly in terms of we've hosted many organisations from across these islands, both in GB and from the Republic of Ireland as well, and have come to see what we're doing in terms of the capabilities we provide. We've had organisations from private and public sector internationally coming to see, and they've all commented on how far ahead we are. Gartner, who are the world's largest IT analyst community, are about to publish a case study in terms of what we've done on multifunctional shared services, which again, a big part of that has been looking at the property, technology, the capability, as well as if you like, the flexible working that underpins. So I think would disagree slightly with certainly the NICS part of that one.
Some of it, I think, it relates to. I think I understand the principle of what the committee is recommending here and the efficiencies that might be afforded. There's an issue of authority and mandate. I think from our point of view, you know, I certainly am responsible in terms of HR policy on behalf of departments just for the NICS. If I started to talk to a local government council about their HR policy, they wouldn't thank me because I have no mandate or no role there in how they handle that or the flexible working that they roll out. So there is something there about authority and mandate, I think. But the principle of what you're suggesting, I can understand. It's maximising the efficiencies across the public sector. I think there just needs to be a bit of work about, well, how could that work and who has responsibility and authority to be able to take it forward.
And so some of the concerns the committee heard were from the private sector as well. Companies based here, you're going to England and other countries across the world and rolling out some of their technologies and their proposals, which seem to be a solution to problems in places like health and home care. But they were coming up across a number of barriers in terms of the public sector here. So I think the view from many in the private sector was that it takes that long to get through the system here. Some way of trying to cut through that red tape or the process to ensure that decisions are made quickly in regard to new technology rather than them being out of date by the time the Department of Health or whatever department is around to making a decision. So I think there's some perhaps there. I don't know what exactly the Department of Finance and Personnel could do, but if we're talking about guidance and to be putting down specific recommendations from the Department in regard to flexible working in terms of technology, then maybe there is something the Department could put forward. I understand what you say in terms of you can't babysit them in terms of this issue, but perhaps there's some guidance there to try and minimise the amount of red tape and introduce new technologies.
Well, I'll give you a couple of hopefully positive contributions on that one. The word governance is often seen as an overhead. I see governance very much as a good thing, especially with regard to shared services. Two specific examples. One is we have something called an Information Governance and Innovation Board. It's actually chaired by David Sterling, and it's, if you like, looking at the information assessment and information opportunities that are there, along with the compliance side of things. So if you like, on the one side it's making sure that we comply with all the good practice security, making sure people can't hack our networks and all the rest of it. And the other side is looking at how do we adopt some of the technology, and there's an appropriate forum for bringing through, and that's why it's called Information Governance and Innovation Board. So that's one thing. That's got representation from all the departments and at a senior level, usually at a grade 5 or grade 3 level, even in some instances. The other one is our IT Services Management Board, which is chaired by grade 3 from Department of Agriculture. It comprises, if you like, senior people from IT, from departments, looking at, again, those opportunities for, you know, where there's, and I've seen some things coming specifically through where a piece of technology was required, or it was suggested in some instances by the private sector. It was considered, it was brought through, and we've tested it in pilot through our Enterprise Design Authority team, and then we've found a way of rolling that out. So we've got very clear mechanisms and governance structures within NICS that also provide a strong message to departments. Now, once you get into the department's arm's length bodies, and take health as an example, that's where we lose the locus and remit of that one, but there certainly should be a strong link through from a department through to their arm's length bodies in terms of the governance structures that we've set up and enabled on that basis. So the other thing in that is Barry Lowry, who's my Director of IT Shared Services, sits on the board of Momentum, which is the IT Industry Federation here in Northern Ireland. So he's the only public sector one, I think, on board. The rest of them they comprise the private sector organisations. So any opportunities that are out there, we get our ears bent fairly strongly on, and we listen to them.
Okay, 11.
Internet-based conferencing. Well, again, this is one where I think still there's a long way to go in this one. I mean, it's probably the word internet-based conferencing should be the preferred method for people travelling. I don't think we're close to that, if you like, mandating that should be the case. But again, we've provided and switched on the capabilities for internet-based conferencing. I'll give you another example close to home. We've got in terms of our digital transformation service, we have a digital advisory board, and one of the people in that advisory board is from the Estonian government, from their digital side of their government, and participation in meetings is via Skype. So I mean, we're using that. So if you like to save them travelling to us, okay, they're getting the benefit rather than us in that instance. But you know, and actually it being able to enable and allow Skype onto our government network provided a very significant technical challenge to us as well. It sounds an easy thing to do, but because of security restrictions. So we've actually tried that. WebEx and Jabber again provide the facilities to do kind of video conferencing that's there. So it's there, it's available. Should we be out driving people towards it in their droves? Again, it's back to the earlier conversation in terms of
just in terms of your own experience of video conferencing. I mean, we've tried it on a number of occasions, and there have been times where it hasn't been successful. How's your experience of that been, and how do we iron out those problems, or is that one of the negatives that still needs to be addressed?
I think for if I can call it, for simple type meetings where, if you like, the nuances of the body language can be, you know, aren't particularly important, I think video conferences can be very appropriate. And I've certainly been in ones where it's been good and ones where you've gone, that was a waste of time, as you've just said yourself. So it's not back to the one size doesn't fit all in this one. Yeah. And again, I think the committee has seen some of the kinds of more advanced technology where you've got a room like this where on one side you've got a wall of monitors, and on the other side you've got people sitting. But it's as if everybody was co-located in the one room. That's a very, very expensive way of doing video conferencing, but it's probably the most effective in terms of feeling part of the meeting, if I can use that word. So yeah, it's horses for courses in this one.
In terms of travel costs then, what's the potential savings?
We haven't measured it. I mean, certainly within DFP we measure annually our travel costs and have targeted to reduce those. I think in fact they're looked at DFP board level on a regular basis, but we haven't put a specific target in terms of if we were to use more video conferencing, then this is the corresponding reduction we would want to see.
Okay. Point 12 then.
12 is about DFP developing corporate guidance for successful implementation, and 3 issues affecting necessary cultural changes. I think Mark has talked about that. Policy, support and training, and I think all of those 3 things go hand in hand on that one. So again, CAL, which is an organisation I've got responsibility for, is very much there to provide the training and support capability. The HR business partner model, which we've adopted very strongly, I think helps to affect the necessary culture changes. And again, yes, managing the resistance to change. Addressing the practical aspects, I think we've touched on a number of areas here, so I think we've probably already picked that one up. And mitigating the risks, management buy-in, top-level engagement. Well, I think we've got that in most instances, and if I can say it like that. Strong business cases. Again, we've said that these should be driven by business need, and that's the way of doing that. Employee and union involvement. We do consult with TUS and with our employees on this. Effective communications. Mark, you've given examples of what we do there. Job assessments, data security measures. Data security is just, it comes with the job. It's part of what people get to be able to do the job. And then the ultimate focus is on business needs, results and outcomes. So I don't think there's anything that we would disagree with on that.
I mean, to some extent, in my view, the building blocks were already there to some extent, you know, and we've talked about that. But actually, I think the committee report has been helpful in shining a bit of a spotlight on those things that are already there. And I think there is work to do around the communications end. I mean, I'll not repeat what I've said before, but you know, there is more that we can do about promoting what we've got, encouraging departments to take it up and take a more strategic approach. The question I think I would have over this is the idea of developing specific, formal, documented guidance to departments. I'm not quite sure what that would look like. I think we're better to focus on the actual promotion of what we've got, maximising it as much as possible, explaining to departments the benefits they can get from it, and just encouraging them at every level to take up those opportunities. And the redeployment and the consequences of the voluntary exit scheme, as you've said yourself, is likely to be a very good opportunity to do that.
Okay, 13 and 14.
I think 13 backs up just what Mark has just said, and actually I think this is where we'd strongly welcome the committee's report on this one. I think in itself this has provided a very good body of evidence by collating a number of sources together, and you know, rather than us going out and regurgitating something, I think actually providing this as a document, say here, go and read what the committee has produced. There's more in this than there is, I think, in the guidance that the Cabinet Office has provided, because you've taken more sources on this one. So I think that's provided the evidence and guidance for strategic implementation on that basis. 14, we talked about earlier, taking lead responsibility for monitoring and reporting on a cross-departmental level. I think that's, yeah, we've talked about that one. And 15, the implementation of the inquiry recommendations. And don't think there's anything specific I want to add on that one, unless there's anything you want to probe on.
Any other questions, members, in general?
Chair, I think there's only the one issue, and that's this one of monitoring at the end of the day, that we don't get sort of taken up that 99.9% of our time's in process. We really have to be able to be objective, stand back and say, are we achieving what we decided? You know, do we have those milestones? You know, we really need to know that we are monitoring and getting the right results. Otherwise, we could still be talking about this in 20 years. It's just in the same manner.
Just, I mean, in terms of Leslie's point, and in light of the apparent lack of data on flexible location working, would it be an idea that the department provide to the committee, say every 6 months, key statistics in regard to that, so that the committee can continue to keep abreast of how that particular area is developing, and that's something that we could perhaps develop a template round to send to the department?
I think we're content to go and consider what else we could do. I'm not sure whether I want to get into 6 monthly, but I think that's something we could consider offline as well. I mean, whether it's once every 6 months or once a year, in terms of, you know, there are certain things we can easily provide through statistics we have available today, and then there's what else might we need to provide in that. So I'm happy to go and look at that again.
We'll draft something up and send it to you and see.
We can talk about that.
Okay. Okay, members. Okay, thank you both very much. Okay, Mark. Thank you.
Mark.
Okay, members, can seek agreement to publish both items of correspondence from DFP on the committee web pages next to the committee report. Agreed?
Agreed.
Performance against business and objectives for enterprise shared services. This is pages 26 to 40 of your packs, and also the preparation sheet of pages 3 to 6 of your table packs. And welcome Colm Doran, Director of HR Shared Services, to the committee. And if you want to make some brief opening remarks before we go to questions.
I think the only thing I'd like to say, and this is perhaps for the benefit of one or two members who haven't been part of the committee before, is just to explain what Enterprise Shared Services actually does. I think it's good to set the context for the business plan, because I think many of us take it for granted. We've been working with it for so long. So ESS provides shared services in a number of areas: HR, finance, IT, properties, learning and development, central printing, and digital services, digital transformation around NI Direct and transforming, in fact, building a digital government for Northern Ireland. So those are the key services we provide. We provide them using a euphemistic term, a hybrid delivery model. So some of those services are delivered fully in-house by civil servants. Some of them are delivered in partnership with the private sector. And again, that's very much in line with kind of models we would see nationally and internationally in terms of shared services. The reach of our services, ESS was primarily set up to deliver services to what are now 12 government departments plus their agencies, but our reach has extended well beyond that. We're now providing services to many, many different public sector organisations. So, for example, we've got network NI connectivity into all 26 existing councils. We're providing IT hosting support for places like Belfast Metropolitan College. We're doing IT support for the Northern Ireland Audit Office. So we've got many different organisations that have come our way over the last few years as we've built and matured the capability that we have. So our business plan that we're going to talk about needs to be understood in that context.
I mean, in terms of the targets, scored quite well, with 36 out of 37 targets achieved or on track. How can we be confident that the targets were challenging in the first place?
I think the way I can assure you of that is, again, back to, we talked about governance in the previous session. I sit as a director on the board of DFP, so like my responsibility and scrutiny comes from within the department as well as through the committee. So that's one level of governance. We have on the department's board non-executive directors who also sit on the department's audit and risk committee, and they also constitute an audit and risk committee for ESS. So because we're a significant size and reach, one of the things that we set up at a very early stage was an audit and risk committee to be able to ensure that we're scrutinised from every direction you can think about there. So this is an area where we're scrutinised, I think, quite highly on. I also managed ESS like a business. We run it with a board of directors, so each of my directors effectively is the executive board. We meet once a month. We scrutinise this. We scrutinise and manage the risk register as well. So we're happy to be probed in any of the points on it, but I think we're confident that we haven't given ourselves an easy ride.
Okay, Leslie?
Yeah, just on the green, obviously, as the Chair said, you've done well, but on the vacating, the 6,000 square metres of existing space, virtually, a matter of days to go on that one, and it was flagged up as green, so obviously...
Yeah, we've achieved 7,708 square metres.
Successful then, so again...
Yeah, we've blown that one, yes. I mean, we've overachieved in that one.
Yeah. Again, I make a point about, how good was the target?
Well, I think it was a very stretching target. I mean, looking at it at the beginning of the year, we thought if we achieve that, we'll be doing very, very well. I think the approach that we're trying to take across ESS is, and we'll see this, I mean, this scorecard has got other scorecards aligned beneath it. So each of my directors has got their own business area scorecard, and not all of those items are green necessarily, because we do put very stretching targets in, and we'd rather slightly fail on a stretching target as to overachieve on an easy one. I don't think we've given ourselves an easy target. 6,000 square metres was a massive jump. We've also been able to exploit the market to some extent towards the latter half of the year in this one, where certain buildings have become available, and that's allowed us to accelerate certain things. So I think to look at where we go next year in this one, I wouldn't expect to see the target as high next year, because
I was going to ask you that.
we've brought stuff forwards into this
I'm
year.
expecting it to be higher actually next year.
Well, I think because if you look at the overall opportunities, it's almost like an exponential curve going downwards. You know, a lot of the opportunities
Still could be going upwards, you know.
Well, we'll be happy to be scrutinised on the detail of it, but I'll set the expectation that it won't be as high next year as the target.
What sort of savings then, Paul, are realised? No.
I'll give you a recent example. So we have spent, or by the 31st of March, which is just a couple of days' time, we will have spent 31.1 million on new property acquisitions. So there's 3 specific, but they're still not completely closed, so not to breach any commercial and confidence issues, I'll not mention where they are. But in particular, that the business case around those will achieve initially a 2.3 million annual rental saving, and that rises to, I think, 3.5 million after 3 years, once we've actually refitted them to exactly the workplace NI standards. So they've been very compelling business cases, and because we've been able to use capital that has been available this financial year, when we know it may not be available next year, we have been able to bring things forward and have got very, very clear benefits realisation plans in place in terms of how that will be tracked, and no doubt you will come back and ask.
I have a difficulty getting my head around that. You know, such a short time ago, the opposite was the case. The policy was really to sell and lease back, and therefore avoiding the improvements.
Yes.
Have all that coming up, as you know, with Dundonald House and so forth. And now we're going the other way around, where obviously capital injection will release those rental savings, you know, but there has to be a cost of capital too.
Yes. Well, I think at the last, or certainly one of the previous committee sessions, we talked about this. We have moved very clearly towards freehold rather than leasehold. That is very much the strategic direction.
Current flavour?
Well, I don't think it's so much current flavour as the market has provided the opportunity. We've gone through the global recession. The market has been very suppressed in terms of property prices, and I think that when you look at the business cases and the affordability and the economic appraisal alongside those, it has moved it radically towards taking that opportunity. So I don't think it's just flavour of the month. It's been driven by the economics of the situation.
Turning to the fit out, again a green situation there, 9,600 square metres.
Yeah.
Again, it's been finished ahead of time, so question about the target again, what were the savings realised? What's the future potential there?
As of December 20, I think this was covered in the letter, we'd achieved 9,000, just over 9,600 at the end of December. I don't have the equivalent figures to hand in terms of the benefits and savings out of that one, but I think that's one the committee wants to write to us on, we can provide follow-up information on. But again, it's the same question: was the target too strict? It's back to we were able to accelerate things in the current financial year.
I think it's an important thing for the future. Then, what's your prognosis for next year? Then,
next year, I think we'll vacate less space, and we'll probably have a slightly smaller target in terms of our fit out, our refit out capability as well. I mean, we were looking at this as a 3 to 5 year plan. And it's where I get to the end of that. That's important. You know, whether it happens in a particular year or a second, I'd rather be bringing it forwards and slipping it out. I think the committee takes that view as well on that one.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
John?
It's around the issues of continuing with the contractual delivery organisations and achieving agreed service delivery and value for money around that. Have you any comments?
Which particular target is that?
It's in target R1, one page, what's in 33?
Oh yes, the very first one. Again, talking about governance, I mean, we are heavily reliant on private sector partners for many, in fact for most of our shared services, and we've got some very, very big contracts in place with them. In fact, the follow-up to this is looking at the HR Connect full business case, which is a massive contract in its own right. To ensure that we are green in this, and we've got a very rigorous and robust process for how we manage the contracts. That's determined by key performance indicators, service level agreements, and penalties that can be and have been applied where there's been service failure. So the basic principle is no service, no fee across all of our contracts. So if the provider doesn't deliver the goods it hurts them in the pocket. Now, my aim is not to hurt them in the pocket, it's to help them to deliver the service we require. And I think, 5 years into ESS having been established, we've got a certain level of maturity across all of our different contracts, where we have, in some instances, actually varied those KPIs where they haven't made sense either for the private sector partner or for us. We've said, it seemed like a good idea at the time, we were penalising you, but in fact it didn't make any difference to us as to whether that service was 90% or 95%. So we've done some contractual variations on those. So we've got robust contract management teams in place across all of those. And they work regularly, and in fact their full-time job is managing the contracts and meeting with the contractor on a regular, at least monthly, if not more frequent basis, to ensure that those are delivered. We get very detailed packs each month in terms of those service level agreements and KPIs as to how they're met, whether they're green, amber or red, and as to what service penalties are going to be applied. And again, we can give examples of those perhaps in HR Connect in the follow-up session, but it has taken us a long time to get to that point. Some of the committee will remember, certainly going back to 2010-11, where we wouldn't have been green on these things. We've worked hard to get there.
And you've managed to, working with the contractors that you're using, nail down the bits that's important to both sides.
Absolutely.
Effectively, and disregard to getting significantly better performance out of across.
I use the term, we had a culture of a fairly adversarial culture of contract management in place, and many of you know I came from the other side of the fence, from the private sector and I think the way to manage a contract is not to beat each other up with a big stick. It's to understand what's the strategic intent of a contract meant to deliver, and we've very much rolled out strategic partnership management as a culture across all of our contract management capabilities, where we have reviewed contracts, we continue to review, and we will continue to review and change those contracts to make sure they're working for both sides. And we had some, I'll not give specific examples, but I certainly can recall some very perverse examples of behaviour where the contract said you had to deliver X, and we're going to get X even though the world has moved on. So rather than say, let's hold you to delivering X, we said, well, let's look at what we actually need now and change X to something else. So we've worked hard at that.
Good. On moving to C2, it's really, you continue to identify and assess opportunities to provide services to the wider public sector customers.
Yeah. A couple of things in this. I think in the current year we will onboard, and that's the term we use, we will onboard around a dozen new organisations to various shared services. Many of those have been part of the plan, if you like, just to continue the reach out into department and their agencies and arm's length bodies. Many of them have actually come to us and current climate dictates that we can't afford them. Could you deliver it for us? So we've been able to exploit the opportunity on that one. So that's been the biggest part. Do you want examples in HR Connect?
Yeah, on HR Connect, on HR Connect, for example, and this is more about the reach into the Department of Justice after its devolution and some of its arm's length bodies. So in recent years we've taken on board the court service, for example, the Courts and Tribunal Service, but early in the 2015-16 year we'll be taking the Legal Services Commission on and providing a full range of HR Connect services to that organisation. And further into 15-16 we'll be doing the same for the Youth Justice Agency. And we are looking at potential for any other customers that can come on board. And in the Centre for Applied Learning, as another example, we do actively, or as actively as we can, try to seek non-departmental bodies to avail of both classroom-based and e-learning products that we can produce. So we're always looking to bring on board new customers where those opportunities exist.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Peter. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your evidence so far. Can I ask you just on particularly aspects of the new e-learning platform? You had target dates by the end of last year to complete the procurement and implementation of that. How's that getting on in terms of timing on that? How far along are you with that?
We were slightly delayed on that. Our intention was to have that done by December 2014. We have actually now completed that
What was the reason for the delay?
Really, it was ensuring that we had all of the technical issues covered. We are basically putting our e-learning and learning management system onto HR Connect, and connectivity issues with some of the departments who are on our network, but also on the DWP network. So really, they were really to ensure that we had all the technical issues addressed before we went live. But this did not affect the level of service that we were able to provide in the interim. So it was, in my view as SRO for the project, it was better to ensure that those technical issues had been resolved rather than go live and damage the credibility of the new system.
What was the cost of the e-learning platform?
Well, basically because we have the contract with HR Connect and we are using existing functionality there, other than the change control costs, which I don't have to hand here, there were no additional charges that need to be applied to departments as a result of that. And as I say, we have now gone live. We've made 5 e-learning packages available immediately, and our plan by the end of April 2015 is to have 29 packages, various e-learning packages made available right across the NICS. We are doing some pilots with departments and individual business areas within departments to assess the capability and the capacity of the system. We don't, we want to ensure that we can support large rollouts of mandatory type training. So we're doing some controlled pilots to ensure that that capacity is there.
And that's ensuring, therefore, that you've got an analysis of what's happening there. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that what's there is implemented correctly, but also that we get the maximum benefit.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I'm turning just one other, I suppose, semi-related issue, which is one of your other targets, which was when you talked earlier about targets being stretched, you'd prefer to have targets that are stretched rather than an easily accomplishable target. And I suppose just in terms of the number of online transactions, you put a particular target at that, at R216, I think, and you then actually were able to not only achieve that target, but got it well ahead of time in that regard. So, first of all, where did you come up with the sort of the figures for the target? Do you think it was stretching enough in that regard?
I'll tell you how we came up with it. First of all, we commissioned a landscape review of existing customer-facing services, and we picked an artificial level of anything over 10,000 transactions per year we would bring into our overarching programme, the 16 by 16 programme, and we would drive through the digital transformation team, which sits in my area. Anything underneath that would sit in a department's digital action plan. So it was a fairly arbitrary target, the 10,000 per year. From that, we looked at what we thought could be delivered from face-to-face or telephone or other channels and moving towards the digital channel. Again, to give some assurance of just, it wasn't a number we plucked out of the air and worked with. Head of the Civil Service himself, he issued a digital first mandate, an NI Direct first mandate, and I go to PSG fairly regularly, where they've scrutinised me, and they certainly scrutinised me on the putting together of the target, and it was stretched on that basis. I can't remember what the exact number was before then, but we certainly moved it up a notch, so that we were going to, if you like, be held to account. Now, we've overachieved very significantly. You can say, well, we're wonderful, or you could say we were lucky. So let me be honest. And
you're not mutually exclusive.
So let me be very honest on that one. We had one particular area where family history searches we put online, and we just, the massive demand for it. I mean, most of that number, the 1.5 million transactions that we have achieved, a big proportion of those have actually come from one particular area where we've seen worldwide take-up of a service that didn't really exist before. So was that planned or were we lucky? The committee can decide on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only issue, if you're talking about sort of family tracing and that type of thing, I mean, I appreciate probably it's maybe been quite a level, therefore you hadn't had it before, now it's been hit. I mean, I think to be fair, probably it's a digital target. It's going to be one that was reasonably foreseeable in that regard, because I mean, it's something that on a worldwide basis there's quite a lot of interest in that regard. I mean, in light of what you're saying, obviously, as it's turned out, whether through luck or brilliance or combination of both on it, you've hit the target very early this year. What's your plans then for next year's target? Are you going to actually do something which is objectively then will end up being more stretching?
I don't have the target, but happy enough to write to the committee.
Okay.
Giving a breakdown of how that target has been achieved so far, because it's not made up of just one area. There's many areas where so I think that would be useful for
Well, I think that would be useful
as well.
if you give us a breakdown of that, but also, I mean, and I appreciate then if you don't have the information, as soon as you do have what the target would be, I think it would be helpful if
it's already been agreed, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
So the information is actually available,
Yes.
but it's just you don't have it to hand.
Correct.
Okay, Michaela?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, presentation. Just in terms of the customer satisfaction, C1, C1.1, in terms of maximising and improving customers' experience with the business area plans, in terms of agreeing a prioritised service improvement plan for 2014-15, what specific measures were planned to improve services, and how are those success of these measures determined? And indeed, it's at amber status.
Yeah.
So, what was the delay in moving this forward?
Right, I'll take both bits of that. The concept of a prioritised service improvement plan. I mentioned SLAs and key performance indicators that we have in our contracts, but we've also got committed service level agreements that we provide to our customers and our stakeholders. So we've got a memorandum of understanding with each department that's signed by the Permanent Secretary and myself that commits us to working together. That is then backed up with a very detailed service level agreement. So we'll have different measures. So we'll have accuracy measures, customer satisfaction measures, and all the rest of it. A service improvement plan will be driven off the back of trying to either achieve those areas that we haven't been achieving, or in fact to make them even stronger, and that might be dictated by user need. Each of the services in ESS has got a director, and their specific responsibility is to own and drive a service improvement plan. This is not an optional extra, so I hold each of my directors to account in terms of having an SIP. Again, managed services, shared services, it's a standard part of the process, having such an improvement plan. Where we've missed this one, where it's gone to amber, was in one particular area, and that was in the digital transformation services. Again, if members recall, is one of the newest parts to ESS. It's only been set up in the last 18 months, year or so, and it was more important for us to get, if you like, the stability of the service and work out what we were doing and resourcing it, and then rolling out the service improvement plan. We've missed that one. It's not a major concern to me that we've missed it. We've been honest enough, I think, to say that we missed the date on it, but it has been and is continuing to be rolled out on that basis.
Does the impact of any budget reductions have an impact on that?
Yes, and inevitably there are certain things that organisations would like us to do and things that we would like to do that next year we won't be able to afford, and that's where the prioritisation comes in, and this will link very clearly into the overall DFP look at where savings opportunities can be made, and we've all been inputting quite strongly to that process and looking at, I've prioritised them high, medium, low, and gone beyond the high in some instances to see where we can change the way we do things or stop doing things. So yes, this is an area where we will see an impact, no doubt about that. Will it impact users in terms of what they see and how they perceive and use the services? I think in most instances, because we've got reasonably mature services, and even say some of these things might have been the nice to haves, but it will maybe slow some of those things down. They're getting good quality delivery in most of the key areas that are required to do their jobs, and that's what will be measured on.
Customers, the impact of the budget reduction then in terms of their level of sales?
There may be some instances where that is the case. The property maintenance budget next year is one area where we're having to cut more severely than we would like to, which might mean that people have to wait slightly longer for things to be fixed, or we're not fixing things in a planned or proactive way as part of a preventative maintenance package. But there will be areas where it might cause a little bit of discomfort, but it might not stop them doing their job.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul. Just one area that I was wanting a little bit of clarification on, and it's OP 1.1, and it's 90% of the PPAs
and the reason for it not being achieved, and could have a breakdown in the details of the specific actions for this to make sure it hits it in future.
Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, the whole issue of compliance with the performance management framework is one that I talked about in the earlier session, but has been very high profile at permanent secretary level, and it was driven on compliance right throughout the organisation. We did miss this target, but it was very marginal. I think we finished at 89% by the date that we were required to be over 90%.
It's now since hit it.
Oh, we're now at 98%, and the only people who won't have had a performance agreement completed will be those who are, for whatever reason, absent from work, whether it be on sickness absence or maternity leave. So yes, we hit this target very soon after the date. We fell just short at the date. One of the reasons, I suppose, for people not getting this done in time, and it ties into the earlier point about customer improvement on HR Connect, the screens and the functionality on the HR Connect system for the completing of performance reports has now been improved, but one of the reasons that people would have given before for not being able to get them done in time was that it was too complicated and that the functionality didn't support them getting it done on time. We've addressed that for the coming year, so I would expect that now that excuse or that reason for not getting them done on time will no longer exist. The functionality on the screens has been made much more simple. But as was said earlier, compliance is what we've been driving here, but really the issue for people is that they really need to have that quality conversation between the line manager and the member of staff, and this part of the process is really the end result. It's putting it on the system.
I mean, this target is, you'll see this at every level in DFP that exists on the department's scorecard as well, and it was very much the permanent secretary recognising that there's no point in paying lip service to saying we're going to treat our employees with dignity and respect if we're not doing performance review. So this is giving us one side of the thing. Okay, let's strongly hold ourselves to account. So this has been an area where I think there's been culture change required within the department, where we've all had to really make sure that this is driven down. So
was there areas which were identified as being worse performers than others?
Yes, there were very clearly, but I haven't got the details to hand. But I mean, even within ESS, there were pockets where wasn't done as well as it could have been done.
What measures, if it was clearly identified that there were areas and departments where this was not hitting its target, what actions are being taken to actually ensure that those departments don't just basically do their own thing and drag along?
This was actually for a period of time last year a weekly or very regular discussion point at the Permanent Secretaries Group. Yeah. This was driven by the Head of Civil Service. There was actually a naming and shaming that went on here right at Permanent Secretary Group level, and I'm sure Paul can also testify at DFP Departmental Board level. And at ESS level, Paul was holding each of his directors to account. So the measures that were taken was really the naming and shaming and ensuring that people actually had those conversations and recorded them in the system. And there is no doubt that in some areas that did require a change in culture, and that change in culture takes time, but it is now, I think, firmly embedded.
Yes, I mean, an example of how we're taking it forwards this year, and communication is a key part of this, not just the big stick communication, but the encouragement side of communication. I had my senior management team, which is 50 to 60 people. We take them away twice a year. We just meet for a couple of hours and we talk about some of the key issues. And I said at that, I think it was 2 weeks ago we had the meeting. I have already got in my diary all my scheduled PPA reviews with my direct reports, and I expect each of them as managers in the organisation to have that done. I've got one completed already. This is one of these ones that will disappear into the background. It's to affect a culture change. We're making it highly visible in order to drive the change in behaviour, and then it'll just be and people won't even think about it. But we'll continue to measure it in the background as well.
I appreciate that once it's part of the process. And sometimes we're extremely process driven, not necessarily, and just go back on Leslie's point, not necessarily outcome driven. I appreciate that if you have the process right, the outcome should be there, but we need to actually make sure that the outcomes are what is driving the process. But
I think it'll be even more important this year as the impact of the voluntary exit scheme and the restructuring of departments actually materialises. There will be less people to do either the same or more work potentially, and people will potentially be redeployed into jobs that they didn't previously do. So a conversation and agreement with their line manager on the objectives for their work and any development needs that they have to be able to do their new roles will be even more fundamental than it has been in the past.
Is there unions issues on some of this as well?
I think TUS have welcomed this, actually, that I mean, this is the positive side of this is that we're treating our employees with the dignity and respect they deserve.
Yeah.
And the least that people deserve is a regular conversation about how they're performing and what's expected of them and how they feel about the job.
No,
so the unions are happy with this.
Right. Just to go back on what is Hardy Annual chestnut of the sickness absence and the 7.6 day target that was set. And appreciate that, yes, it came up as green on the status, but likewise, I would just like an update on the current performance against the targets, performance over recent years, and the level of compliance against the management attendance policy, lessons learned, and future improvement measures. What is planned to actually ensure that we have don't take our eye off the ball, and appreciate that there might well be some long-term sickness issues which maybe make up a large percentage of what is an average of 7.6 days. And is there any measure to actually ensure that we don't actually allow this to slip over the future?
If I start with the last part of your question, Vic, what have we done that we believe has impacted this quite significantly? One is absolute clarity for managers that this is part of the day job. This is not an optional extra. Managing sickness absence is very clearly part of every manager's day job. So, for example, if an employee goes off sick, the manager is expected the day they go off to enter that onto HR Connect. If it's entered late, they'll get a warning. Well, they're
Yes,
plus one manager. So I mean,
yes.
there's visibility goes up the line on this one to see. So we've put a mechanism in place to ensure that people are clear on their responsibilities. There's also a very, very clear structure in place to support people when they're off sick. And again, that's with the line manager in the first instance, that regular conversations will happen. And there's been mandatory training for everybody, right up to permanent secretary level in this.
But there has been difficulty with some members of staff who have been off sick, who feel that it's inappropriate, or they feel that they're being harassed, or they're being targeted.
There are some
and as a consequence, you end up with some, and maybe it's all down to communication about the process and how it's working, because some of them are getting the wrong end of the stick, and as a consequence, they're getting their back up and are exacerbating and saying that this is causing them undue stress. And what would have been a minor time out of work, or a small period of time, ends up being elongated because they say that they're dealing with a stress issue associated with management follow-up. And how do we address that to ensure that it's not seen as that?
Absolutely concur with you on that one. We have seen instances in the past where someone has gone off in stress because they've got on with their manager, and the next day the manager's on the phone saying, "Why are you not at work?" So that is not the way to manage those sorts of things. As part of the training and support, we've made it clear to everyone that where those specific situations arise, we'll bring in our HR business partner to work with us. So we're actually going to remove that part of the problem, and it should at this stage be clearly understood. Perhaps there might be the odd one or two where we still get elements of inappropriate management, but I think in the vast majority of cases, we've seen the evidence coming through.
I'm not necessarily talking about the management point of view, I'm talking about the perception between the person who is off, what is actually happening.
Yes.
Sometimes their perception of the whole thing skews what has been a fairly straightforward, should have been a fairly straightforward.
And again, I think that's where the role of the HR business partner and the team comes into play.
And there are other services available to staff as well, the welfare service and the employee support service. If a member of staff chooses that they do not want regular contact with their line manager, then the line manager under the procedures and with the training that they are receiving, are obliged to acknowledge that and comply with that, but it then passes to the HR business partner to deal with the consequences of that. We've also done a lot of work, again, on HR Connect to improve the compliance reporting here. It's slightly similar to the performance management. I mean, we have to start with compliance to make sure that the processes and the procedures are actually well embedded. So we are now compliance reporting, and we'll be implementing new compliance reports to show how quickly absences are being entered on the system, and there's a target to do that within the first day of absence. Also, the closing of the absence on the day that it finishes, because there is a lag with some of the detail here, because if the absences aren't closed, the figures are skewed because their absence appears to be longer than what it is. Managers are also required to conduct return to work interviews with their members of staff to look at whether this is a recurring issue, whether there's anything that the manager or the organisation can do to make reasonable adjustments for them to come back to work. And those return to work interviews are also required to be recorded within, I think it's 3 days of the return to work. And all absences need to be certified, either with self-certification if it's under a period of time, the member of staff certifies it themselves, or if it's longer than that, then it needs medical certification from a doctor. So all of those things are reported in terms of compliance, and they would all be expected to improve not only the compliance but also the level of sickness absence that would result from it.
If it's stress related, we've brought forward the interventions that are appropriate. So rather than waiting for someone to hit some trigger point at 10, 15, 20 days, I can't remember what the trigger used to be, when they report ill with stress, we're able to bring in the appropriate support at that point in time as opposed to waiting. And I think that's had an effect. It's interesting, I mean, long-term sickness versus short-term sickness and how we manage and report that. So at ESS Executive Board, every month I get a report, all the directors get a report of a number of different HR issues, one of which is sickness absence, and it doesn't show names. It will show the numbers, the target that we're at against our 7.6 days. It will also show the number who are currently on long-term sick, and it only takes 2 or 3 additional people to be in long-term sick when you see quite a significant swing against the target, and it's those that we've been particularly focused on right across, I think, NICS, not just in DFP on that basis as well.
It's important to say here, though, that we're talking from an ESS perspective. Corporate HR are responsible for absence management policy across the NICS, although ESS through HR Connect supports obviously line managers and staff by giving them the tools to be able to record these things on the payroll and HR system.
And we're currently forecasting as a large number of people go off in long-term sick over the last number of weeks, we should come within the target of 7.6 days. At the start of the year, I would not have thought that would have been achieved. I would have said we're going to miss that target. So that's one I'm very pleased on.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the HR Connect full business case review. Do you want to just give us a brief outline of the paper, and then we'll go straight to questions. The members, pages 42 to 56 of your pack.
I give a very brief synopsis, and you've got the paper in front of you. The overall EHR programme, of which HR Connect is but one part, was a very complex transformation programme, and the 15-year contract that we have in place, certainly at the stage of signing the contract, was one of the most challenging and innovative contracts in the public sector anywhere that I've come across. And we had some early stage difficulties that we've talked to the committee about before. Sitting at this point in 2015 and going back to the full business case, we are 0.62% over tolerance limit in terms of our expenditure on that full business case. I would hope the committee would take some considerable comfort in that and welcome that we're so close to that. I think for an overall programme that was £465 million over 15 years, to be 0.62% above that target 9 years in, I haven't come across performance like that in terms of our cost.
Is that the most up-to-date figure we have?
Yes, it is. The one you have in the letter is the most up to date. That's, in fact, we had just completed when we were last scrutinised by the committee and gave evidence, we said when we conducted the full business case review, we'd come back, and that this is as a result of that one. So we've written to you, giving you that information.
Just in terms of the variance on page 44, large increase in the costs related to HR functions, 14.5 million, and overheads of 4.5 million. And this appears to be offset by the service charges, which are a result of the contractual protections in the event of delayed implementation. So whilst the contractual protections appear to have saved the day in terms of direct costs in this graph, could you outline what the impact has been in terms of the delayed implementation on the wider benefits, the qualitative effect for all the departments? For example, improved human resource data leading to better decision making, efficiencies, etc., and how that has been factored into the calculations presented.
Benefits realisation, and I'll make a general statement first of all. Many of the full business cases for the shared services projects, programmes that we had in place, many of those benefits were quite woolly, and were had probably too many things to measure, and probably had some things that weren't capable of being measured. One of the things that we've tried to do with HR Connect is to reduce the number of measures. I think there were 3 key benefits. So from 2009 onwards, we got to the point of saying, look, there's too many factors here, too many variables. What are the things that we're going to focus on? Number 1 was to reduce and contain the costs from an NICS perspective. Number 2 was to improve the management information at a departmental level. And number 3 was to increase the satisfaction with HR services. I think some of those other ones where we perhaps would have hoped for a cause and effect are looking back going, well, if you were starting again, you might not have put those down as particular benefits you'd want to have in a full business case.
But in terms of aside from the implementation delays from Fujitsu, what else contributed to the variance of the 14.5 million in terms of HR functions and the notional overheads of 4.5, or was it all down to the delays?
This is the 6.6% of 14.45 costs.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the 10.3%.
There were 2 aspects. That one was the delay and contractual difficulties that we had in the early stages, and again we've given some fairly considerable evidence over years on that one. That caused a delay. It caused us to take money away from the contractor, which obviously saved money out that we were paying. We've since reused that money to allow us to recycle it inside the overall programme. The other side of that was we needed to put more retained HR staff in place for longer, and departments chose to have those people for longer. So that 14.45 million was a direct result of the increase of having more people in terms of retained HR, our service management division, and recycling some of that money into change control. So rather than charging departments for significant chunks of work, we actually recycled some of that. So we've moved it from one line into another, but stayed within the tolerance of the business case. That's probably the easiest way to explain it.
Indeed, as a result of the savings that we got from the contractual renegotiations, the departments, I mean, this was a major change programme, which was a Cabinet Office Pathfinder programme, which had never been done before. HR directors took the choice, because of some nervousness they had of being able to operate the new operating model, that they would actually put additional retained staff into their retained units. And that obviously is what happened in 2009-10. But overall, we've been able to contain the costs of the delivery of HR within the original envelope of 26.4 million, which is both the retained HR function and the service charges to departments. Now, the whole area of the retained HR function is one which we're now looking at again. Under the direction of the Director of Corporate HR, I have commissioned a programme of work now looking at the level of retained HR in all departments. And it also includes some things which were not in the original scope of the EHR programme, which in training and in occupational health. So we're actually now looking in its totality at how HR is delivered for the NICS. That work is ongoing, and we'll be reporting to the Permanent Secretaries Group later this year, probably in May or June time. And I would expect that that will potentially change the shape and necessarily the size of HR units, but that work is still in development.
In terms of the number of staff, at the bottom of page 46, there's reference to the assumption that there would be 368 staff, but it says that it's been necessary to fund an additional 46 posts, leading to a total of 414 staff altogether. Why has it been necessary to fund these additional posts? What are the costs of the posts, and how could we reduce that going forward?
Again, it's back to that original point. It was due to the savings that we got out of the contract that the department actually, because they hadn't operated this new operating model, the HR directors took the decision to fund an additional 46 posts. That is now part of the retained HR model, and it was affordable within the 26.4 million that we had to deliver HR services. And it has to be remembered as well that during all of that time we've also contained inflation costs, so there has been no there's been no addition. So basically departments have been able to contain their own smoke here in terms of delivering within that agreed number at 2008-9. It's also worth remembering that pre the EHR programme there were something like 900 FTEs in retained HRs. That has been more than halved to just over 400 now, 410. And as I said earlier, the work that we're now doing on the retained HR function across the NICS can potentially reduce that still further.
Can I just raise one point before I bring Paul in? In terms of the voluntary exit scheme and the financial pressures within the department now, will that impact on the total staff complement?
I think that's inevitable that it will, and I think it provides an opportunity to look at a better delivery or an alternative delivery model. So, if you like, back to good timing sometimes in these things, and never waste a good crisis. So, I think looking at what an alternative delivery model might possibly look like in order to reduce even further the number of retained HR staff, this gives a good impetus for that.
Paul?
It's just on the, it's come in your last point, and it's the 900 that we're delivering it on a fragmented basis. I'll just use that term, as opposed to what has actually happened now with centralisation of HR. Of the 900, has there ever been a study done to identify where those 900 disappeared to, or have they just been recirculated back into the greater NICS, or whenever, and appreciate it took, I'm a bean counter, and I really get quite frustrated whenever I hear, because we've made a wee bit of a saving, we decided to actually employ an extra 40 odd people just because we had the money there to do it. It's not an employment agency. It is there to deliver a function, and if the function's being delivered with 10 people, that's fine. It doesn't mean because we budgeted for so much money, we spend that money, and as a consequence, we just bring it up, create employment. Of the 900, I could understand some maybe being relocated back into the HR, that aspect. Yep. Where have they disappeared to? Because I don't appreciate that there has been a drop-off within the whole NICS. Yes, they might get the opportunity now under a voluntary exit scheme, but a lot of those people actually probably ended up doing some other function. Has there been any work done to identify where they went to?
I don't think we've measured specifically, but if you take you through the history of it.
But should there, on the business case for this being put forward, should there not have been a very clear indication of what would happen in the
what we did, we took the money away from the departments. Yeah. So we basically took away the money that they would have used to pay the people. So in the sense that
departments, that's all very well. Departments we might well have taken money away from those departments, but they will have ring-fenced and protected and done whatever they have to, and they will have either cut off on what they were doing as other functions, and let's be honest, within their budget, that's what they will have done. They will have prioritised their budget. I'm not so sure that those disappeared. You might well have cut the money, but they have actually either cut the delivery of the service to create this employment agency that we now call the NICS.
Well, I think that's departments will have to answer for what they've done with individual people. We don't have a measure of that, but the 26.4 million that it previously cost, and that's the figure that I feel like it's been inflation-proofed throughout the period of the contract. The 26.4 million is what we've taken, which was about 450 posts, if I recall correctly. That's used to fund the service that we now provide. The natural wastage in a system of 5,000 people, reabsorbing 450 into what posts, I don't know, but that is a relatively small number. 450 people would not have just disappeared from the system, but I can't give you any evidence on what departments have done with those people.
And of the 450 that now are working through the HR, how many of those were new to the NICS or were completely brought across?
That's another number that we couldn't give you any evidence on. Well, departments as an employer, the department is an employer in their own right. Yeah, they employ the people.
I employ people myself, and I know where they came from.
Yes.
And I can tell you where they come from. We're not dealing with millions of people. We're dealing with a few hundred here. We know where they came from. We should be able to tell where they came from and what they were doing before.
The majority of these people will probably have worked in retained HR prior to HR Connect and will have been therefore retained within those retained units. I think the points you make are very valid, and the work that we're now doing to establish what the HR units should look like now will drive further efficiencies, and because of the voluntary exit, should actually reduce the numbers not only of those working in HR units but of the NICS overall. Some of those people will have been redeployed into departments to do other things, but we wouldn't have that. It's for departments to decide how they allocate their overall budgets and how they deal with their overall workforce.
But some departments, is there a possibility that some departments are attempting to duplicate what you currently do?
Yes.
And there was certainly evidence, especially at an early stage in this, where we had duplicate systems and duplicate processes running when people didn't trust HR Connect. I think the days of that have mostly disappeared. I couldn't put my hand on heart and say they've all gone. I suspect there's still people running some shadow spreadsheet somewhere in the system. How you get to those, I don't know.
If I could give a specific example, we're doing work at the moment to implement business intelligence on HR Connect, which will provide compliance reporting and other business information to line managers, some of which we talked about earlier, on compliance with performance agreements and absence measures like return to works and certification and opening and closing of absences. Anecdotally, it's more than anecdotally, departments have told us that they have a number of staff in their retained HR units who have to do that currently and have to police that compliance. If we put a solution in place which has been subject to a separate business case, that has the potential to release 36 staff from those retained HR units from doing that particular function. Absolutely, we need to drive out any duplication of what retained HR units are doing, which could be done. We're paying for a service that is provided by an external contractor, so we should be making sure that anything that they can do is being done, but also we need to look at any other functions that could be done in a similar way and to drive out as much of that duplication and inefficiency as possible, and that's what we're focused on.
Can I come in that just a different way, and you might touch on this slightly later, in terms of benchmarking work that we've done? What does good look like in respect of this? Because to some extent that's the only bit I can control. And for me, what good looks like is the proportion of HR staff to ordinary staff. We set out with a target, I think, in the full business case of 1 HR person for every 80 members of staff. Now, whether that was a good or bad target doesn't really matter. If we look at what benchmarking has evidenced for us, best in class is 1 to 78 people. So our target was to get more or less to what best in class would have been perceived at the time the FBC was put together. Within ESS, we're currently sitting at 1 to 65 members of staff, which means that within DFP.
Well, within the NICS, sorry,
Yes.
NICS
So,
is 1
sorry,
to
it's
65.
1 to 6, I've written that down wrong. It's 1 to 65. So we're not yet at the target, but I've got a target that I'm aiming for that will say when we get there, we know that is absolute best in class right across public sector in the UK, because that's the set of comparators we have. As to then what departments will have done to reabsorb, deploy, or let staff go through voluntary exit, I think departments will have to account for that themselves on it.
Has there ever been any benchmarking done against what, and maybe you might have some difficulty getting it, what is going on within the private sector on a similar basis?
As part of this work that we're now doing on the retained HR function, we will be looking at best practice across both the public and private sectors. We will be looking at other organisations like the Home Office, the Scottish Executive, etc., who have done this. The 1 to 65 measure varies across departments, as does the implementation of the business partnering model, which was supposed to come on the back of the implementation of the EHR programme. This work will actually unearth all of that. But again, it has to be remembered that departments are their own employers, and that corporate HR is responsible for policy. We're basically, HR Connect is the delivery arm here, if you like. So whilst we can provide the information and we can provide the level of service that people are looking for, there needs to be a corporate view as to how HR needs to be delivered right across the NICS, and that's exactly what this piece of work is now aiming to do.
I think anecdotally, 1 to 80 is pretty good in the private sector as well. There's many private sector organisations would like to get to that point, and I know that from the interactions we have with private sector shared services, but it would need a very detailed benchmark with private sector comparators to actually give us the detail. Yeah, so it's anecdotally is all I can give you on that.
Just in terms of the review of HR arrangements, including HR services outside the scope of HR Connect, is that something that the committee could be briefed on? Or could you give us a sense of where that now sits?
That's the work that I've referred to on a number of occasions. That work is ongoing. We're due to report to the Permanent Secretaries Group in May. The SRO for that project is the Director of Corporate HR, and I'm working closely with him. I don't see why we couldn't share that work with the committee once it's come to its conclusion.
The committee was previously told as well that a service improvement plan was put in place to identify and address areas of dissatisfaction. Could you give us an up-to-date position on where that sits, and how does the level of user satisfaction compare to the previous position?
I'll let Colin talk about some of the details in that, but back to, we talked about service level agreements, SLAs, and key performance indicators, KPIs earlier. There were 74 SLAs in the contract. It might vary slightly from that one now. Customer satisfaction was always one that we had a concern about, especially in the early stages of take-up of HR Connect. And if I describe the way we used to measure versus the way we measure now, before Colin comes on to some of the specific numbers on it, the way the surveys were done previously was there was a survey sent out randomly to all civil servants, or to a subset of civil servants, who could then score against various things, including what they perceived their satisfaction to be with HR Connect. It wasn't necessarily people who even used HR Connect in the last week, month or year. It was just to everybody, and we've got strong suspicions, but no more than that, that people were giving a low score at a point in time based on a general malaise and general low perception. What we've done over the last period of time to try to get a more accurate sense of what we're doing, and we're doing this consistently, so IT Assist was the one we started with. We ask every month a subset of those people who have actually used the system or used the service in the last month, what their perception was of it. Now, this is very much what private sector does in terms of if it's telephone call or if it's web usage. Sometimes something will pop up on your screen, would you like to fill in this? And most times you'll just say no. But we get a statistically significant survey of those people who've actually used the service in the last month. That's what we're measuring now. We've had that in place now for some time. Colin, I'll hand over to you at that point to give some specific examples.
On HR Connect specifically, as Paul said, we had 74 SLAs. We've now renegotiated those with the contractor. We've now got 61 SLAs, so we've got rid of some of the ones which weren't really of any benefit to either us or the contractor. But importantly, we've implemented some new SLAs, and those include customer satisfaction levels, and there will be abatements applied where they're not met. Since before we started doing it in this way, which is surveying the people who've used the service in the month, the omnibus surveys that Paul talked about had given us very low satisfaction ratings, both in the 30s. So in 2011 and 2012, the level of satisfaction with the HR Connect service was 30%. Since we have implemented these new SLAs and surveying those people who've used the service, the level of satisfaction has been encouragingly much better than that. The people who have shown dissatisfaction with the service, those who are either strongly or disagree that they're getting a good service, is about 10%. So, you know, we've gone from a place where less than 3 in 10 people thought the service was good to a place where only 1 in 10 people think the service is bad. As well as that, the number of complaints that we have had over the period has dropped quite significantly. In 13-14, for instance, we had over 700 complaints. This year, to the end of February, we have less than 400 complaints. And when we do the analysis of those complaints, they aren't always directly as a result of what HR Connect has done. It could be something that a line manager in a department has done. It might be a disgruntled member of staff who just doesn't like the outcome of a particular decision. So,
or it might be policy.
Or it may be policy related. So effectively, the satisfaction levels of the service are on the increase, and the number of complaints about the service are on the decrease, and both of those are pretty encouraging.
Okay, members, any final questions? Well, happy enough. Okay, Colin, thank you very much. Paul? Thank you very much.
Sorry, another one.
Members, moving on to subordinate legislation, the Public Service, Civil Service and Others Pensions Amendment Regs NI 2015. Can refer members to documents at pages 58 to 95 of your packs. The SR will amend the regulations 2014 as to make provision in relation to persons who have a partnership pension account. It also makes minor amendments to the regs to make sure that the regulations properly reflect the policy regarding transitional arrangements for members of the old scheme who become members of the new scheme. The Department has advised that these minor amends are not the result of subsequent changed circumstances, but further consideration as to whether the regulations produce the intended result. The rule will be subject to negative resolution. Can I advise members that if they have any queries or require further information, an official is on standby in the gallery and will come forward to address queries. Members have any questions on this one? That'll be enough. Members content with the proposals put the question. The committee has considered DFP's proposal for supported legislation on the Public Service, Civil Service and Others Pensions Amendment Regs NI 2015. There is no objection to policy implications of proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed? Agreed. Valuation, Telecommunications, Natural Gas and Water Amendment Regs NI 2015, pages 97 to 103. SR has been laid in the Business Office and is subject to negative resolution. The statutory period expires on the 5th of May. Can I inform members at the meeting on the 20th of January, the committee considered this proposal. The Department confirms no changes to the policy since then. The Examiner of Statutory Rules has no points to raise either. So members contemplate the questions that the question that the committee has considered SR 2015-147, Evaluation, Telecommunications, Natural Gas and Water Amendment Regs NI 2015, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
The Superannuation District Council's Order 2015, pages 105 to 117 of your packs, has been laid in Business Office by DFP, subject to negative resolution, and stat period expires on the 28th of April. At the meeting on the 4th of March, the committee considered the initial proposal. Department confirms there have been no changes since then. The Examiner has indicated to DFP that he felt that the order should be confined to a person employed by district councils by virtue of transfer of schemes made under Schedule 8 to the Local Government NI 2014, as these would be consistent with the PCSPC NI amendments. In response to that, the DFP has confirmed that it was content with the order as drafted, and the examiner has confirmed that whilst he is not minded to highlight any further points in this regard, he maintains that the point he raises was valid. He has pointed out that if anything is needed in the future, the Department has the order-making power to clarify the point, and the examiner's report will be published on the Friday 25th of March 2015. Do members want to ask any questions in regard to that? Any points? Or are they content? Great proposal. Settle yourselves now. Members content then.
Be more popular with Easter coming up. All the prospect of Easter eggs.
Members content put the question. The committee has considered SR 2015-141 Superannuation District Council's Order NI 2015 and subject to the examiner's statutory rules report has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Agreed. Correspondence.
Okay, Chair, I'll just pick out some pieces of correspondence for members' attention and one or two required decisions. Page 119 of the pack, the Minister, DFP, provided the details of the Barnett consequentials from the Chancellor's recent budget statement. So, just for information, it's routine. The committee receive this after each budget statement by the Chancellor. So that's for members' information. Then, page 121, there's correspondence from the Department regarding a study into adverse impacts in NICS recruitment competitions. This stems from research that the committee commissioned some time ago, which the Department took on board and employed consultants to examine the issue, and the Department's now responding to the consultants' recommendations. So that there is a briefing scheduled in this, Chair, after Easter, so it's just for noting in the meantime, and research can also consider the papers in advance of that. Then there's correspondence just at page 164. It was sent to the committee from PAC, but it seems to be from a member of the public raising the issue about the voluntary exit scheme and whether there would be, in effect, a revolving door whereby people could leave and re-enter other parts of the public sector. Chair, certainly in the briefing the committee got, I think the members were advised that certainly in the case of NICS there would be implications in terms of paying back the money. But I'm not sure if there was an answer in terms of the re-entering any other parts of the public sector, so I'm not sure whether the committee wished to write to the Department for clarification on that.
I think that if it has been paid out of the public purse, we should be dealing with it on the same basis, because consider that there are certain people who want to look very heavily upon what we do here and how we deal with things. So I think we should be doing it on the same basis, that if you leave it and you get a payment for, there should be a period of time, and if you're re-employed within a number of years, if you're getting full redundancy payment, I think you should be taking yourself out of the loop for any public sector payment for a period of time.
Because the VES is public sector, isn't it?
Chair, I think, it may be useful trying to get clarification just from the Department. I would tend to agree with the sentiments of that. I think the only issue is I don't know what legal barriers necessarily you could put, and I think that's where the difficulties would lie. No, but you may have a situation where somebody is exiting a particular job, and you may be able to put effectively a specific barrier to them filling that job again. How widely you can draw that may be questionable, but maybe worthwhile getting that. But I suppose the other issue, just and again, and I appreciate it kind of defeats the intention of this game. The only issue at one level is if you're moving to a situation in which whatever the final figure is of a reasonable scale of reduction within the public sector as a whole, and this is on the basis of not simply the person exiting, because it's not just a question of, say, for instance, a bit like the RPA type situation where you're almost effectively trying to get rid of basically sort of older, very long-serving councillors, and in part to try to make room for maybe younger replacements. I mean, this is on the basis of the posts being suppressed. So
they're not allowed to come back either.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I mean, at the broader level on it, there's a particular purpose in some of that. What I'm saying is this is on the basis of a large number of posts being suppressed, so I suppose the only issue also would be as to what the opportunities would be relatively limited for people as well. on that side. But I think it's worthwhile exploring sort of what's precisely getting done by the department on that basis. And I think, while I appreciate the actual advice will be privileged, to clarify just as well in terms of what they're doing, you know, I suppose to clarify what legal advice that they sought in relation to that as well would be maybe helpful.
Okay. Okay, we'll follow up on that, Chair. Then there's correspondence from circular correspondence from Tom Elliott's private members bill at page 166, Chair, for members to note. I think the previous approach taken in private members' bills is for members to respond individually or on a party basis, so members may wish to follow up on that. I think that's all the correspondence, Chair.
Okay, committee work programme. The draft work programme is at pages 179 to 184. I take members' views on whether they consider it prudent not to schedule a committee meeting on the 6th of May, given that the general election is on Thursday the 7th.
Agreed.
It might be awkward, yeah.
What about
I'll be here.
Wednesday the 29th of April? Just want to try and get an indicator from members in terms of availability for the week before. Would there be any implications there as well?
I'll lead footpaths.
One day absence is enough.
One's enough.
Westminster election, not Assembly election. The problem.
Who knows what implications?
Okay, for you, you're not a candidate, like.
I suppose, how do you know? Chair, I think it'd be very difficult to, in any way, sort of have a.
She's in Northampton.
Have things missing on the 29th. You know, I think we need to go ahead and 29th, particularly as we're during the morning time. I don't know if the only thing is whether or not maybe slightly aim to keep on the 29th the agenda a little bit lighter in that regard. You know, but I think we should meet on the 29th.
Okay, any other business? Committee visit to Edinburgh on the 27th and 28th of May. Members have indicated whether they can attend except for Marching Judith and John.
Not wanting to sound, I would have been very keen to go, but that week we are going, or I'm going. Actually, you're going as well, but we're. I didn't want to sound like we're both going.
We aren't going anywhere.
Thankfully, we are in the one slide.
The public record.
Going to the Assembly Business Trust on the Sunday after that.
Got a better offer, in other words.
It's not that, it was more, I would imagine getting it over the line on the home front wasn't going to be easy.
Washington.
In a way, in Edinburgh and then going to Washington a few days later.
Wasn't it?
I haven't asked my husband yet.
But you're not even sure if you're going.
Thank God.
What?
You're not even sure if you're going.
So
Oh no, I'm going.
if you've
I'm going
enough,
to Washington.
I would, I was going, Chair, with the names, you had a decent cross-party.
Child
6 confirmed there. And
Aye.
Take the wheels with you.
Suppose we could all bring
okay, can advise members travel arrangements will now be confirmed and that any modification or cancellation will incur a cost. There will not be a committee meeting, therefore, on the 27th of May. For members, normal practice for committees to delegate authority to chair, deputy chair during periods of recess to submit views on releasing or withholding of information for FOI requests. Committee will be advised of any such requests, the views expressed by the chair and our deputy chair, and the response issued by the FOI unit at the first available meeting in the recess period. The next meeting will be 15th of April at 10 a.m.
Daphne, can I just? Are there any women travelling?
Yeah. No. 1, 2, 3, 6 men.
Bossman's holiday.
I will go. I will go then, because I think it's important that we do have women.
Female present.
That means you've got a party at Leah Parson.
Yeah.
Independent. There you go.
It'll be me.
Okay. Meeting closed.
30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee.